Good evening, everybody. I'm Reg Hoyt. I'm chair of the One Health Working Group here at Delaware Valley University. And we are working as a group to kind of foster awareness of One Health across our entire campus and to bring this concept not only to our students, but also to the community as a whole. So if you're a student, I'm glad you're here with us. If you're a member of our community, welcome. It's great that you're here, and I hope that you join us for other seminars or have joined us for other seminars. I'm going to give a little brief introduction to the One Health concept. And so for me, this is pretty simple. It's not a really tough concept. We've only got one planet, and we're all living on this together. And our interactions with the environment, with animals, with plants, and with each other are, it's all part of a give and take. It can be either positive or it can be negative interactions. And certainly, I don't think it's too hard to think of some of the negative interactions that have occurred. But think about the positive things. I know for me, just going out in my yard is a great way to lower my blood pressure. Going out into the woods, seeing animals, all of these things have an impact on us. And I think that tonight's talk is really going to touch on that very clearly. From the standpoint of One Health at DelVal, I think that one of the important components of this is transdisciplinary approaches. And these are approaches that work not only at a global level, but at a regional, a national, a state, a local level of understanding that other people have expertise that have to be brought to the discussion about any particular problem. For myself, in my career, I'm a conservation biologist, and this just makes perfect sense to me. Whenever I've tried to work on anything as a biologist, I got to tell you, what I can do to help an animal is pretty simplistic and it's pretty straightforward. But I have to work with people, and I have to work within a political structure and within an environment that may not be too forgiving of the things that I want to do. And so for me, over my career, this has been a pretty obvious thing to latch onto. And it certainly is a growing program here with around the world. I'm trying to get my computer to go forward. There we go. So at DelVal, we've been looking at this from basically three different approaches. One is education. And so certainly any student of you that are out there who are in any of my classes, you get beaten to death by the concept of One Health all the time. Almost any problem I can look at, I can say, this is a One Health problem. It requires looking at it from the environmental side, the human side, as well as the animal side. For research, DelVal has always been about the land. And I think there's tremendous opportunities at a small university like ours to reach across. We don't really have big silos, except over on the ag side, but we could reach across to each other and get engaged in this transdisciplinary approach to things. And then finally, outreach. And that's what tonight is all about. This is outreach. Outreach to our students, outreach to our community. Each semester, we have 6 seminars that we host. And tonight, we are very lucky that we have the Doylestown Township's Environmental Advisory Council here to sponsor and brought us this great speaker tonight. And so I want to introduce Heidi Shiver, who's going to talk to us a little bit about what the advisory committee is all about, the council is all about. And we'll also introduce our speaker this evening, Richard McCoy. Thank you all for being here. In the chat, I think Heidi's going to add some things, but I'll also add linkages to where you can register for other upcoming One Health seminars and also where you can find materials. Our librarians have done a heck of a job on bringing together lots and lots of information on One Health. Thank you. Heidi, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Reg. Thank you so much for co-sponsoring us tonight, and we're happy to be part of this seminar series. Again, I'm from the Doylestown Township EAC, the Environmental Advisory Council. We're an active volunteer group that researches issues and advises our local township advisors to help them make informed decisions regarding the environment. We also undertake a variety of conservation programs and issues, including native plant and tree plantings, habitat restoration, including our award-winning native plant garden in Central Park, invasive plant removal, stormwater management, reducing single-use plastics, addressing climate change, working with Sierra Club's Ready for 100 program, and also are members of the Tree City USA and also Birdtown, Pennsylvania program. And we're delighted to be here. So I just want to give you a little bit of background of how we came to be here tonight. Last year, we had a passionate resident, Mel Scott. She reached out to us about pesticide usage in the township. And with her help and guidance, we created a subcommittee. And from this subcommittee, we developed an educational pamphlet focusing especially on the negative impacts of pesticides for children and pets. We also created a resource page providing websites for information about pesticides, their negative impacts on people, our pets, wildlife, and an overall environment, as well as alternatives to use for our gardens and lawns. And I'll provide these different links that are included here on the slide in the chat after I speak. As a culminating event, we wanted a speaker who would address this issue and offer some alternatives to pesticides. And so we're so fortunate tonight to have Richard McCoy here. He's the principal owner and president of Richard A. McCoy Horticultural Services. He is a 30-year green industry professional, and he established his business in 1995. He's recognized as an organic, ecological, and sustainable land care leader since 2005. In the winter of 2020, McCoy Horticultural began their Sustainable Energy Transition Initiative program, which started their changeover from gas-powered combustion engine equipment to clean and quieter battery-powered equipment. In 2021, they also became New Jersey's first American Green Zone Alliance certified service pro company. And also in 2021, Richard was awarded the New Jersey Nursery and Landscape Association's Horticultural Professional of the Year. So congratulations on that. His work at Stony Wood Garden, a 3.5-acre private woodland garden in Princeton, New Jersey, has been recognized by the Smithsonian Institute's Archives of American Gardens. Richard is also an advisor for a number of groups, including the Organic Landscape Association and Non-Toxic Communities. He's a co-contributor of Rutgers Organic Land Care Best Management Practices Manual and a returning instructor for the Rutgers Organic Land Care Certificate Program. So Richard, welcome. We're so glad to have you here and looking forward to seeing your presentation.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you very much. Thank you, Reg. I appreciate everything. You guys have me in. I appreciate everybody being here this evening. Let me just switch over, share my screen, and we'll get rolling here. Well, Heidi, thanks for that introduction. I appreciate that. Makes me sound like I need to take a nap. I do a lot of stuff. I mean, maybe maybe that's what makes somebody an expert, is they just can't say no to things, I suppose. So thanks for that. Yes, I am Richard McCoy, and I have been in business since early 90s, or not in business since early 90s, in the green industry since the early 90s. I started as an arborist and then transitioned over from an arborist to landscape work. When I was an arborist, we started the conventional way, which makes our transition to organic, sustainable, and ecological, I think, even more impactful, because it shows that somebody who has a history of conventional pesticide use, non-native plant material, and invasive species can make that transition to one of a more sustainable, ecological, and organic practice. So I started spraying trees with a 1,000-gallon spray rig. When I would go out spraying, my job corps would read, we were supposed to go out and spray tree canopies for leaf chewing and sucking insects. So we were effectively killing everything in sight as we were going out there doing our work. I was working for a landscape company. We were planting in all sorts of different conditions. The soil biology the biology was not really even paid attention to. We planted in situations where we were probably more better suited to planting rice, because it was like planting rice paddies. It was mud, it was wet, essentially creating anaerobic conditions by suffocating all the biology without knowing at that time what we were doing. So in 2005, we did start that transition. I went to a course from the Northeastern Organic Farming Association in Connecticut. They're sort of the originators of organic land care. And with that course, it changed the trajectory of my thinking and my company. We're going to move forward here. Just make sure everybody wants to know that we don't work in Doylestown. This is not an advertisement for our company. What this is an advertisement on a process or philosophy and even systems. We're not advertising our work here, for you guys to understand how we do things and to get a better understanding of how sustainable and ecological land care practices. And hopefully my screen shifts. There we go. So we'll talk about exactly what is organic land care. We'll touch on land care versus landscape. Soil, like I mentioned, is extremely important in our work. Organic lawns, we'll do some talking about native plants, some green infrastructure, battery powered equipment, education and leadership, and what you might look for when you're looking to hire an organic landscaper. There's a lot of people out there that don't necessarily practice organics and preach it, but they don't use the organic practices, and most of us on the call probably know it's called greenwashing. So we'll touch on that a little bit, and give you some little tips on how, from a contractor standpoint, you can practice this kind of work for quite some time, what you would be looking for, and language that you would hear from somebody that is selling you an organic program to understand if maybe they are greenwashing or maybe they are an authentic organic land care practice. So as Heidi mentioned, I am part of the Rutgers Organic Land Care Program. We took the work with the soil profile and the NOFA Organic Land Care Standard, and we put together our best management practices manual, which is really a bullet pointed description of how to do things organically, instead of like the NOFA Organic Land Care Manual it's a fairly large book. This is more, it's bulleted and more straight to the point, but there are 10 things that we practice as an organic land care practitioner. The couple of the main key points, obviously, are doing no harm, treating the landscape as a whole living system. Regular landscape practitioners, regular landscape or conventional landscape, traditional landscapes, don't look at landscape as a whole living system. They look at them as, it's just a thing that they go and mow. When if there's a bug, they spray pesticides on it. It's green and it may be clean, but it's not. Promoting soil health, like I mentioned, that's extremely important to what we're doing, and a very key factor in doing things organically and sustainably. Feel free to take screenshots of any of these slides. I will have a bunch of links on here as we're moving along. Probably easier for you just to take a quick screenshot of these links, or if Reg and Heidi are quick enough, if they can jot them down and type them in the chat as we're going, that would be awesome. So whatever works. Favoring cultural practices over chemical applications. That's a big key to what we do, right? We're mowing lawns higher. We're trying to match plant cultures with site conditions so that we're not putting a square peg in a round hole, so to speak. And obviously encourage diversity and avoiding monocultures, which is huge when it comes to running an organic business with honesty and integrity. We talked about as far as greenwashing. So land care versus landscape. When we look at landscape and land care, to me, land care is more, well, it says exactly what it is. You're more of a steward of the land and you're taking care of the land. You're nurturing the soil biology, you're nurturing native plants, which bring in pollinators and beneficials. You're not spraying pesticides. If you see the leaves on these plants getting chewed up a little bit, you're looking at the leaves on the plants that are getting chewed and thinking that's a good thing, and you're looking for that insect actually doing that. There are very few pests that we have to worry about really that will do a severe amount of damage that we have to spray for. Gypsy moths, spotted Atlantic fly, obviously, and emerald ash borer obviously is a big problem. But there are very few insects in the landscape that we really need to worry about spraying insecticides for when we landscape as a whole. Just because you manage a landscape, it doesn't mean you don't care. It means you don't recognize the things that we're talking about. Recognize the ecology, recognize soil biology, and you may keep it neat, you may keep it clean, but you're not taking care of the land in such a way that you're managing the ecology. Organic land care, or land care in general, is a complete paradigm shift. Instead of looking at the issue and spraying something, or like Chip Osborne, one of the pioneers in organic land care, says, I love this quote by him, issues can't be solved with a bag, box, bottle. It means you can't just go into the closet and pick out something grow on it and try to solve that problem. You need to analyze and see what's causing that issue. Usually it's cultural. And more times than not, a plant is planted in the wrong spot, and you can change that issue that you're having with a simple transplanting of that plant into the location that it is. Or improper planting, obviously, is an issue too, right? We know all the most volcanoes are a problem, so you pull that mulch away and expose the root flare, and a lot of times some of those issues will go away because the plant's not stressed any further. Directions, it's not a product swap. You're not going to take a organic product. I mean, you could take an organic product and use it in a conventional system. However, you may not have the efficacy, or you may not have the result that you're looking for if you're not accustomed to what that material is and how it works. What you certainly cannot do is you certainly can't take a synthetic product, a conventional synthetic product, and use it in an organic landscape. And again, that product swap thing is one of the misconceptions for folks, is they feel like that you can pull one piece of a conventional system out or a conventional program and then plug in an organic, and it's going to be, and the products don't look the same. This reason, natural, when you're doing things organically and managing in a land care system, you are utilizing the natural systems, plant, soil, again, biology, ecology, all those things that work in concert with each other. Whereas when you look at it in landscape sense, conventional landscape sense, you're doing things artificial. You're spraying for insects. You're putting down synthetic nitrogen that a lot of it leaches. Most of it's not used, and whatever is taken up quickly, although there are slow release fertilizers, but a lot of that nitrogen gets lost in the process. Another big reason why we switched over was our team member, applicator, and client health. We wanted to make sure that we were paying close attention to both of our teammates, and they didn't come in contact with glyphosate and Q4D and all those things that are used commonly in traditional landscapes. In a sense, you have a greater risk of exposure for everybody to be in contact with those. So this is organic land care. Organic land care is not for everybody. Organic land care doesn't have to look like this. There are different ways to look at organic land care. This is one of our properties. This particular client wanted a good majority of native plant species with a little bit of balanced turf grass, so that they do have some children that they wanted to have space to play. So we accommodated that, and there was a good balance in the dialogue back and forth when we did this landscape. This is not organic land. A landscape with invasive species. Follow my cursor here. We've got Chemiciferous, we've got Crimson Pygmy berberis, weeping fairies, which I don't know if you could see back here. I don't know if you can see on your slide. I think my pictures are here, but there's Bradford pears, and the lawn more than likely is managed with synthetic material. To me, this is an old model. This is a model that was built in the 1960s. Our first suburb was really installed in around the late 1940s in Levittown, Long Island, and that to me was the beginning of the end of any kind of ecological landscaping. Synthetic fertilizers. What we're doing for the most part in conventional sense does not benefit ecology, like I mentioned a number of times already. It's really like if you had a painting on the wall, you might as well be looking at the screen of your computer, or have a painting of this landscape on your wall. That's the amount of benefit that it does in the landscape. You'll see a lot of bare mulch in some of these areas too. One of the key things that we try to practice is covering the mulch with native plants as much as possible. That cuts down on weeding. That also cuts down on the need for any synthetic pre-emergence. Because it's beneficial native plants that are covering the ground instead of having open areas for weeds to excessive irrigation. Obviously, when we're using native plants, we don't need to irrigate except for periods of establishment. And Tony Lund from Quiet Princeton, he calls plastic landscapes. I've seen a couple of his talks. Essentially, traditional landscapes to him are called plastic landscapes. Very little to none ecological. So this is what we did when we started. We went out and sprayed tree canopies, like I mentioned, with a 1,000-gallon spray rig, trying to kill everything in sight. This is why we don't, right? We know now that we have ladybug larvae that are taking care of aphids. We have brachynaid wasps. We have all kinds of cool things that are happening. If we look for them, we know they're there. If you take a minute and watch the little wasps and little flies and little bees and or little, the little insects that are buzzing around on our plants and realize what they are, most of them are beneficial. So anytime you're out there spraying, you're more than likely going to harm them. Everything that's going on in each slide, this picture here, like I mentioned, the ladybug larva eating the aphid, the adult ladybug eating the aphid, the exoskeleton of the molted ladybug, brachynaid wasps at the top and left side, right side of the screen, are parasitizing the aphids. So when you're out spraying, killing all this ecology. And this is organic land care again. So one of the things we try to do is we try to minimize the amount of turf grass in our lawns, in our landscapes. And by doing so, we look for problematic areas where we can incorporate native plant species as opposed to continually throwing grass seed at areas that are problematic that you won't get grass to grow. There are areas that will or native plants will certainly grow in any area that you have in your landscape if you match cultural conditions of the site to the native plant species. More than one way to plant a pollinator garden. Certainly is not organic land care. We see multiple volcanoes all over the place. Totally detrimental practice. Working on as best we can to educate contractors on how and why not to do this. In a space like this, again, if you were to eliminate all that, it's just, to me, it's a nightmare. If you were maintaining this property, you either have to go in there with a 33-inch walk behind string trimmer. It's just very inefficient way of managing the landscape. So if you were to knock down all those mulch piles and plant that bed with appropriately appropriate native plants and fill it instead of having mulch there, it's a low maintenance application, and there's no going in there and string trimming, very little weeding, and the trees and shrubs would be more healthy too because they're not. So when I first started in landscaping, we called soil dirt, and I learned from a very adamant foreman of mine that soil or dirt is what's under your fingernails and soil is what plants grow in. So it takes a little bit of a beating sometimes to understand the difference between soil and dirt. And when you realize that the soil is alive and that there's all that bacteria and fungi and protozoa and amoebas and all kinds of cool stuff that you see under a microscope, and you start looking at some of these things and you start to loosen up the soil with air spades and work in compost, and you see how friable soil becomes alive. And you see that in the center slide, you see the worm and the worm castings and the fine root tips of plants that have grown into this new loose friable soil. Left and right screens, you see all the fungal hyphae. It's just an amazing thing once you start to realize that there's a living system underneath your feet. Elaine Ingham, one of the pioneers of soil biology, she obviously has pronounced a claim that there's a teaspoon of productive soil. Generally, there's over 1 billion bacteria, 1 million and 1 billion 100 million bacteria in a teaspoon. I mentioned the Norfolk, Connecticut course back in 2005. This was one of the slides that took me on my path away from conventional and into the world of organics. What this slide is a fungal hyphae strand that's actually strangling a nematode and will ingest that nematode. Most of the problematic nematodes are the right size to fit through. It's the amazing thing about this biology, right? Most of the nematodes that are problematic will fit inside of these fungal hyphae strands. Any of the beneficial ones won't fit. They're most likely too small, and they won't be constricted by the fungi. So it's pretty interesting once you start looking at things under a microscope and again realize what's under your feet. It's not just something you should be putting salt-based fertilizers and synthetic. So in organic land care, we talk about organic lawns. How do you manage organic lawns, and how do you get a traditional program to an organic program, or an organic system, I should say. So we look at it this way. We take traditional programs where you're using, again, the product-based applications of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, not paying attention to soil biology, not paying attention to ecology. And then we can work to a bridge program. If somebody's working on transitioning from a traditional program to an organic or regenerative system, we use bridge. They'll use a bridge product, and what that is that's a combination of an organic and a synthetic that will slowly get to a point where now you're starting to work on a regenerative system. When you start to talk about systems instead of programs, that's when you get away from the product-based side and you start looking at the system side. So your inputs are anything you put into that system is beneficial to that system. Regenerative mostly works on soil and soil biology. So as you're transitioning from that conventional program to a bridge program, then to regenerative, that's when you finally start to focus on the soil biology. It's not to say you can't before, but if you want to take these steps as a way to manage from a traditional program to regenerative to an ultimate organic program, these are the steps you take. Regenerative is when you start to work on the soil, decompaction, adding biostimulants, adding biology to the soil, including better grass seed, more fescues into the blends, and better, things like that are improving that system. And also, like we talked about, reducing the problematic areas of lawn and making sure that you're only having your turf grass in areas where grass wants to grow. Okay, so it's a monoculture, it's not a native, doesn't belong here. Most of our grass plants are from Europe. So we need to work within that culturally appropriate condition for grass plants, which is full sun, 8 hours, moderate irrigation when it's needed, not over irrigated in the spring, not over irrigated in the summer. When it's over irrigated in the summer, the grass roots become shallow, then they become susceptible to drought. You want infrequent waterings, and that's the way you're going to work your way from a traditional program to a bridge to regenerative to an organic system, where at that point all your inputs are organic, your soil biology, your pH, all those things have stabilized and sustaining system. Then you have nutrient, the system's producing nutrients on its own, and then it's just 3 to 5 year, depending upon how much information, or not information, how much material, organic materials, and how cognizant you are of your work, you can build that system in 3 to 5 years. Example of organic lawn, another organic lawn. So let's talk about some green infrastructure and native plants. So as I mentioned, one of our favorite things to do is eliminate turf grass whenever a client allows us to. We do manage our turf organically in our company, but I would much rather prefer not. I'd much rather have rain gardens or more pollinator spaces, more native plants. My background is more of a plant person than it is as a turf person. So I don't have any preconceived notions that I need to have acres and acres of lawn. We try to reduce that when we can. Green infrastructure uses in the landscape. So we talked about rain gardens, bioswales, all those things will help control runoff in your landscape. They will help dry out areas if they're wet. What you have to remember if you're going to install one of these pieces of green infrastructure is a rain garden or bioswale, is that if you have a wet area, these tools of our landscape don't go in that wet area. They go upslope, catch water before it gets down into those wet areas. These rain gardens want to drain 24 to 36 hours after heavy rainfall. My sort of philosophy is if it perks, it works. So if you do a perk test and your water drains out in 24 hours, you're in good shape. 36 is okay. We want to eliminate the idea of standing water, obviously, so we don't have issues with mosquitoes. Another benefit to rain gardens, obviously, is as we're capturing that water, creating into the aquifer and recharging our aquifers. This is a rain garden on one of our properties. This is about a 500 square foot rain garden. This captures all the water off the back of the roof of the house. Over the course of 5 years, this 500 square foot rain garden will capture, collect, filtrate over 1 million gallons of water back in aquifer. Just as a idea of what we're using for plant material in here, Echinacea purpurea, there is some Itea, there is Aesculus parviflora, the bottlebrush buckeye, Heliopsis leanthoides, the false sunflower or swamp sunflower, and there is also some sumac typhina. And one of my favorite plants in the foreground, really strong pollinator, is Picnanthemudicum, which is mountain. If you're interested in the plant list, I could certainly, you guys can email me. I have my email up at the end of this session here, and take that down or take a screenshot, and I can certainly send you. We got 6:30. Talk a little about planting, proper planting. So we have a huge issue, supply side and install side, with our, within our industry of plants being taken from a nursery too deeply, being planted too deeply, and then dug improperly in the nurseries, and subsequently then installed in landscapes improperly. The slide, the picture on the side here that has sort of the zigzag arrow. That's what happens when you get a balled and burlap plant out of the nursery, and you install it with that burlap and twine and the cage and everything still on it, without doing what we call a root collar excavation, which is the oval on the other side of the screen here. That starts to establish that root flare. So when you're doing this, if you plant trees like this, like on the left side, you are essentially planting trees too deeply, and you're greatly limiting the amount of life expectancy that you'll get out of this tree. Whereas if you do a root collar excavation and you take all that loose soil off the top of the root ball, find that root flare, and then plant it at the proper height. Again, I'm not advertising, but we guarantee our trees for 3 years, and we have very little to no replacements. We started taking this approach to planting it. The other thing too is obviously put it in the right place. We've talked before in the session here about right plant, right place, and culturally appropriate plantings. That's usually important. You don't want to put things that want full sun in the shade, vice versa. You don't want to plant them in areas of drought, because they just won't survive. So it's very important that you pay attention to the cultural aspects of the plants where you're planting them. Do a root collar excavation. Again, this is a 30,000 foot view of what we do. All the things I'm talking about are certainly different topics that we could do sessions on at any time and spend an hour, 2, 3 days even. So going quick through this because this is sort of an introduction, like I mentioned, beginning of what organic land care is and how we do things, and how contractors can do things differently if they just look at things a little differently. And this takes about 10 minutes to do this, so it's not labor intensive. If you are a contractor on this call and you're calling me crazy for doing something like this, then I would challenge you to do the math on what it takes to root collar a couple trees for 10 minutes versus mobilizing a crew to go replant, mobilizing somebody to pick up trees at a nursery again. The mobilization costs would way outweigh the minutes that it takes to root collar your trees. Battery powered equipment. So we work with AGSA, as Heidi mentioned in our introduction. AGSA is the American Green Zone Alliance, and they were instrumental in us making a transition from, or we're still transitioning. We haven't completely made the transition, but at least getting us started on the transition to battery powered equipment. We have one complete battery powered fleet, battery powered team that uses a 48-inch stand-on mower, a 33-inch walk-behind mower, a couple of 20-inch push mowers, string trimmers, chainsaws, hedge trimmers, pole saws, everything you can imagine that would be gas or hand powered. We have an electric, and they work very well. The unfortunate thing is the backpack blowers, which has the bullseye on its back from our industry, is not up to speed with gas, and it's going to take some time for it to get there, and I don't know that it ever will. I like to use the phrase that the gas backpack blowers are 50% plus in cost and 50% less in output. And it's an unfortunate thing, but it is what it is. So what we advocate for with AGSA, and I did some work with Sustainable Princeton, trying to have folks understand that it needs to be a transition. Right? You hear me say that word a lot because this is not, it's not a cold turkey flip a switch and all of a sudden you're going to do these kind of things. It took us years to incorporate these practices into our company. So as far as the battery powered equipment goes, one of the things we advocate for with AGSA, and being the Northeast rep from AGSA, it's important that this is clear to contractors, homeowners, municipalities, anybody that's thinking about transitioning, is seasonal allowability for gas. Backpack blowers, like I mentioned, just are not strong enough to do the work or the electric backpack blowers just are not strong enough to do the work of gas backpack blowers. So we have seasonal allowances for spring and fall use. The rest of the time throughout the season, there's no reason why you can't use battery everything. The battery power, life, strength, torque on the equipment is just as good as gas, and it even better. Ergonomically, some of the equipment is even better than. So there's our team doing some work. Like I mentioned, the string trimmer, ergonomically comfortable, fantastic. No motor up by your head with fumes in your face. And I'm not anti-gas. I'm not just, I'm not anti-pesticide. We just know that there's a better way or an alternative way to approach. Again, the backpack blowers are the ones that have the bullseye on their back. They certainly are effective enough for certain periods throughout the season. But again, with AGSA, the American Green Zone Alliance, and with the work of Princeton, and also in New Jersey, there are two bills that are being proposed for the banning of backpack blowers in New Jersey. And I've been working with AGSA on that. We've been working with the New Jersey Green Industry Council, the New Jersey Landscape Contractors Association, and the New Jersey Nursery and Landscape Association on trying to have a few things in these bans so that contractors can slowly transition to battery power without having it be too burdensome on them. So one of the things is I mentioned is the seasonality of it. We need to have spring allowance and fall allowance for gas. A month in the spring, 6 weeks in the fall. That's it. The other thing is education. And one of the things we do with AGSA is education. We educate contractors, municipalities on how to use this equipment, on how to get the ROI on this equipment, how to manage the equipment so that they get the ROI, how to take care. You're going to spend a lot of money on this equipment, so you need to accommodate for certain things so that and train your team so that the equipment is taken care of appropriately so that you get your ROI. Smaller tools, you can get your ROI in 2 to 3 years. The larger ride-on equipment, mowers, 48s, 72s, 52s, you're looking at 4 to 5 years on ROI for that. But the beauty of this electric equipment is there is no maintenance, minimal maintenance. I had a conversation with a contractor not too long ago. He started asking about the hydros. I said, well, there are no hydros. How do you maintain the hydros? I said, there are no hydros. What about the belts? Well, there are no belts. Everything's electric. All the motors are all electric, and it's very simple and easy to use. It's really once you can wrap your head around the alternate way of doing this kind of work, it just gets easier. It's easier on the team. It's easier for homeowners. The beauty of the electric equipment is our homeowners have told us that they didn't know we were on their property. They thought that we were 3 houses down maintaining another property. And the beauty of electric, it is quieter, it's still loud, but the frequency is higher in most of the battery powered equipment. So the low frequencies of our gas backpack blowers penetrate headphones and buildings. It dense things much easier than the higher frequency, which is why it's problematic to have that around offices and home with people home with COVID, or not with COVID, but home because of COVID. Working from home is important. It's obviously something that's come to the forefront. Education and leadership. So these are some of the things, like I mentioned, the NOFA organic standard. NOFA is a great course. They have a 4-day accreditation course, all online. It's good. Anybody can take it, whether you're municipal, homeowner, contractor. It's open for anybody. And I would encourage anybody that's looking to take this kind of direction to take this course. it's really, really beneficial. It's on everything that we're going through. Landscape sense wise, not battery powered equipment wise, not yet anyway. Or not. And then AGS, the American Green Zone Alliance, that's where you're going to get your battery powered education. We will, again, train companies, we will train municipalities, we certify green zones. A certified green zone is a location that has been vetted, trained, only using electric equipment, and certified green zone. AGSA also certifies equipment, certified field tested. We'll take out, if you go to agsa.net, the website for AGSA, and look for AGSA certified field tested, there are a number of suppliers on there that we have field tested. Dan Mabe, the founder of AGSA, is tremendous advocate of what we're doing. You know, he's been at this for years, so he's tested all this stuff side by side. He's done, you know, time efficiency, you know, ratings on all this stuff. So there's access there for you to find out if there is equipment that you might want to transition to, what might be the best equipment for you. And then our New Jersey-based Rutgers Organic Land Care Program, unfortunately, it has been put on hold since COVID started. I'm not quite sure when we're going to kickstart that again. But again, the best management practices manual is there. You can just Google Rutgers Organic Land Care and you would find that there. So we're getting near the end here. I got a couple of quick slides on what to look for when you're hiring an organic landscaper. And this is from an article from our blog that we put together. So this will give you some ideas on how the language and conversation that you would have with an organic contractor or somebody who's trying to pull the wool over your eye and doing some greenwashing on it. So it's really important to understand the methods will not suit everyone's taste or philosophy. So not everybody's going to be suited to organic land care. You may be listening to this call or this webinar and you may be gung-ho and ready to go practice organic land care. And then once you start to get down into the weeds, you may understand that it may not be for you. It may not be for a contractor. It just doesn't suit everybody. It's very important that there is a alignment between the contractor and the homeowner, and that the philosophies are in sync with each other, so that as the process transitions, both homeowner and contractor, if they're new at this, that you understand what you're both getting into. Consumer needs to be honest with themselves, like I mentioned. Are you genuinely working and invested towards more ecological and responsible landscape practices? Or is it a warm and fuzzy kind of thing that it sounds good, but then when you see that, this guy's going to cost 25% more up front to do this kind of work, I don't want to do it. You know, you have to look at your future and say it's 25% more now, but in 3 years, that 25% could be reduced overall 50% because there's a different approach to what you're doing. Again, the other important thing, if this is that alignment, that contractor has to be 100% invested in the process. And that alignment, like I mentioned, is vital. Soil is the key. If you're speaking to a contractor and they're not talking about soil biology and things like I talked about earlier in the context that I'm talking about it, if they're just talking about putting Milorganite down or biosolids and corn gluten, that is not an organic program. If that contractor is saying that they're transitioning, fine, but you have every right to find out what that contractor is putting down on your property. Investigate. Do your due diligence. Ask them for the materials that they're using on their property. Hopefully they'll be truthful about what they're doing. If a contractor cannot explain the importance of soil and what soil plays in the idea of organic land care and organic lawn care, you need to look further. Provider. Soil is the key. Use your power as a customer. You know, the internet's an amazing thing. If you can drill down and sort through all the minutia that's on there and find the things that are important in organic land care program and understand that language like we're talking about, you're going to be a much more better consumer of an organic land care practitioner. Again, ask to see their materials they're using on your property. Larger companies seem to have a more difficult time transitioning if you're looking for a company because they are so locked into that conventional way that it's hard for them to see through and transition to an organic program. You may have may have better luck with a smaller company that's more flexible, that can pivot and move towards an organic program versus a company that's larger, that's been using conventional means. The organic approach is all encompassing. If you are going to look at it from the viewpoint that we do, where we want to plant keystone species on our properties, we want to plant oak trees, because oak trees will call in 500 different types of lepidopter species of caterpillars. So we want to bolster that ecology with whatever we're doing. We don't want to spray synthetics on our lawns. We want to bolster the soil biology, that whole encompassing system, that whole needs to be approached that way. And like I mentioned, be open to paying more upfront. If you're speaking to a contractor and they're telling you there's 25% more upfront, but over the course of time, that 25% is going to be an overall net 50% reduction in your landscape, including water use, sourcing things locally, native plants, minimizing lawn space, all these things we're talking about, your costs will go down. Be aware of greenwashing. And it is 6:47. That's all I have for you this evening. I thank you all for being on this webinar. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them at this point. Here's my contact information. I'm always open for questions. Email, follow us on Facebook at McCoy Horticultural, LinkedIn, and obviously our blog, Ecological Matters, on our website. Well, very much.
Thank you so much, Richard. We actually do have a number of questions. Please, if you've got questions, try to put those into Q&A. I will go back over to chat and try to get those as well. But we do have a growing number of questions here. Susan asks, does fertilizer make the weeds grow bigger and stronger?
First, you have to define what weeds are, right? We had that, Reg and Heidi and I had that conversation at the beginning before folks joined. Yeah, you sort of just have to define what that weed is, because a lot of misconceptions are we have a lot of native species that people call weeds, but anytime you put fertilizer down, it's going to affect the plant growth.
And I'm sorry if I pronounced this name wrong, but it's Allele, I believe. Why is battery-powered equipment more important for lawn care than gas?
Why is it more important? That's a very good question. So that's sort of a philosophical question that we approached as a company. It fit our business model because we were doing things organic, ecological, and it just made sense for us to move to battery equipment. So one of the few things that we look at as far in relation to we think is better, if you want to call it better, than gas, is your carbon footprint is lowered. You do less damage to the environment because of fumes and whatnot. The teams don't have to be around those fumes. Some of the tools are lighter, not all, and it's quieter. So those would be some of the things. And then so you could also turn around and say, well, what about the conversation comes up? Well, what about fossil fuels versus mining for lithium? And that's definitely a conversation to have. Neither one is environmentally friendly, right? So you have to sort of weigh the options of the benefits that I just mentioned of using battery power versus gas, versus the reduction in fossil fuels if you're using battery power. Again, lithium and gas, neither are good for the environment. So you have to weigh the options, and the final outcome is, for us anyway, was it made sense for us to focus on battery powered to get away from gas, because it was quieter for our clients, better for the environment. Overall, as far as reduction in fuels and exhaust, that's probably the main reasons why. The other question, and maybe that's a question that's going to be asked later, is what happens to the batteries after they're worn out? Well, some of the larger equipment, we don't know yet, because they're rated for 9 to 10 years, and we happen to use mean green. The large mowers we use are mean green mowers, and they haven't been around long enough to fully test the life expectancy of these batteries. They're expected to go 9,000 hours, which is plenty of time. And then what happens with them after they're used? They are repurposed as battery power equipment becomes more used and more acceptable. There's always going to be people out there sourcing and finding ways to do things with batteries, and one of the things they do is they repurpose them to start supercomputers. or they'll use them in other things where, the battery power for lanterns and flashlights, things like that. Other things that don't need that draw on the battery that the landscape equipment needs. There's still plenty of life left in them. Just the life expectancy from a landscape contractor has been used up. So we repurpose them, even opposed to recycling. So that's where we stand.
Great, thank you. So Claire asked, I've seen a lot of information out there about not bothering with the leaves at all. Just leave the leaves on the grass. Would the most organic way to handle fallen leaves be to simply leave them where they fall?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as I mentioned, we have a 1960s model of landscape maintenance. And that 1960s model is meeting a more ecological and more environmental communities. So, I don't think with the expectations that people have as far as a landscape contractor, whether you're, I think we're probably as green and environmental as any other company, which is why we reduce lawn areas so we don't have to clean off leaves off of all those lawn areas. And if we do, we put them back into the beds because we want that biology in the landscape. We want those insects to overwinter on our landscape. So yes, of course, leaving leaves is definitely the most environmental way to take care of them. But if you want to talk about a regenerative landscape, best thing for us to do is stop landscaping altogether. Right? In 25, 30 years, we'll regenerate our landscape back to what it used to be, and that's a hardwood forest. But I don't think the majority of the populace, right? We have that 1960s mentality of where we have to have a clean green lawn with nothing on it. And so as landscape contractors, what we need to do is we need to balance the two between more modern ecological landscaping and that generational block of having acres and acres of green grass.
I think you already answered Anita's question. She was asking also about insects overwintering in the leaf litter. So I think you already covered that.
Mm-hmm.
Anonymous says, how much would it cost to turn my backyard into a natural, organic, ecological, and sustainable yard? Would it cost me a lot, and would maintenance cost even more? Is it worth the cost-wise? Which I think you probably addressed in your presentation a little bit.
Well, here's a question for Anonymous. What would it cost for you not to be anonymous? It's a matter of what your expectations are for your property. We work with a lot of different budgets, and it's not something that has to happen in one fell swoop. It can be something that I use this word a lot, transition, because it's not, if you have an expansive yard and you want to transition to a more ecological means, it's going to cost a lot of money. So a lot of it you have to work with a contractor that is open to a long-term process. You have to be open to a long-term process. Again, it's that client and contractor alignment that I mentioned. And you have to have a realistic budget seasonally to make that process work. Do I think it's worth it? 100%. 100%. Once you get into the understanding of what you're doing and seeing all the beneficials on your property. I mean, one of the things I love doing that we never had before is we get texts from our clients with pictures of monarch butterflies and crystals. And for me as a contractor, that is just, it's an awesome thing, because that's just more dialogue with your clients. And another way to interact with nature is another way to interact with their clients, because they're out there with their kids looking at these landscapes. They don't have to worry about having their pets outside because we're not using the chemicals. So to me, yeah, it's absolutely worth it, 100%. But there's steps. It's a process. It's not, like I mentioned, you don't flick the switch and all of a sudden have an organic ecological landscape. It just takes
time. Anonymous kind of followed up and said, if you had a homeowner who wanted you to not necessarily do something that was organic or ecologically safe, would you still do it to please the customer, or would you deny their request and offer alternatives?
Boy, Anonymous is very good. That's a very good question. We market our work to people that want our kind of work. I would never say that I am an organic ecological contractor and do something that would be against what we're preaching. So we turn down work, anonymous. We turn down work if it doesn't suit what our.
Lynette S., we are trying to get our Parks and Recreation Department to quit using Roundup all over. Any suggestions?
Tough one in a setting like that. It depends how willing they are. Our herbicide is vinegar based. We use food grade vinegar. We use a little bit of orange oil. We use yucca extract and a little bit of salt flour, and that's our herbicide. So
Cool.
yeah, if they're open to it, like I said, there's really nothing on the market that's going to replace glyphosate. And all these things I'm talking about, and this is where the product swap thing that I mentioned is a bit problematic, because, like I mentioned, we're filling our garden beds with plant material. So we're not spraying or putting pre-emergents in our garden beds because they're full of native plants. We have very little mulch space open for weeds to germinate in our bed space. So it's that holistic viewpoint that really is the best approach. If you have to, if you sort of have to piecemeal it, it can take some time. It can be problematic, but there are ways to do it, and that's our approach to it.
Janine asks, what is greenwashing?
Greenwashing is when, like Anonymous asked me if I said I was an organic contractor, and I said I was going to do something organic on your property, and instead of focusing on soil biology and putting down 2,4-D to kill the weeds, that would be greenwashing, because I would be doing something synthetic, not organic, as opposed to the organic process that I was telling you. You had said, I'm going to do things organically and use synthetics on your property. That's greenwashing without your knowledge.
Here's a nice follow-up to that from Barbara. We have a lawn company that says that it's all organic. They spread products much like a conventional company about 6 times a year. They spread an organic weed killer product over the whole lawn, even when there are only a few weeds along the blacktop driveway. They promote aeration yearly. Does this sound like an organic approach?
Hard to say. I would be happy to review that if you want to email it to me. I'd have no problem reviewing that program if you have it. It's hard to say on the surface to say whether it is or not, and I wouldn't want to be disparaging to somebody who's actually is doing the right thing.
And Claire asks, is there a kid-friendly, eco-friendly turf for family yards, or is any grass in PA not really organic?
Well, it's how you manage it, right? So as far as turf grass goes, our turf grass blends, which I think is what you're talking about, we use about 80% fescue. The rest is bluegrass with a tiny bit of rye in it, and that's what we use. And what makes it organic is the inputs, right? So like I just mentioned, 2,4-D, any of these synthetic chemicals that a conventional program would use would not be considered organic, and then we would know.
And in the chat, and so these don't necessarily have names attached to them, can you talk about mulch, black, and what is best?
Okay, so if you want to talk about mulch in the sense of an organic program, which is what we're doing, if we were to follow the Rutgers and/or NOFA standard, non-dyed mulch is all we use. Non-dyed natural mulch is all we use. Any dyed mulches are not acceptable or allowed.
And I think you already addressed the question of horticultural vinegar, so I'll move on. What is the difference between cultivars and natives?
So native plants are anything or a plant that is local to a region, local ecotype. So we have native plants that are located right from New Jersey. Then you have a region which would be like the Northeast. So they're native to a certain region, and sort of where that dividing line with native plants becomes anything that was here prior to the European settlers touching down in the cultivars are anything that has been a native species that has been altered to have a different leaf shape or color or flower size or flower color. And they can be problematic when you talk about using natives, because what happens when you start to use cultivars, or some folks call them nativars, is that when you start to change the structure of these plants, some of the insects that are specialists cannot forage on these plants once you change them. For example, we all know the monarch, and we all know the monarch wants Asclepias tuberosa or butterfly weed. So if you were to alter that Asclepias tuberosa, change that orange flower, that orange tubular flower, to like a flat petal, or change it to a burgundy leaf, that insect would not be able to forage on that plant, because evolution, that insect and that plant have grown up over the millennia to be compatible together. And once you have those, excuse me, once you have those specialists working together, nativars start to upset that balance once you change the structural integrity or genetic integrity of that plant. So it's always better to use a species plant over a cultivar. That answers your question.
I think this is an interesting question. Is this a social justice issue?
No.
Okay.
Not for us. I mean, like I said, we transitioned in 2005. That was way before social justice got really a foothold. So for us, it's a philosophy that we believe.
MG has a question: how difficult is it to transition an 8-acre condo community with lots of turf grass and non-native shrubs?
I hate to use the word impossible. It is possible, but it's extremely difficult. Unless you have everybody on board that's willing to, again, it's that alignment that I talked about. Unless you have everybody involved that's interested in making that transition and understands how that transition is going to happen, understands the cost up front and how that cost is going to taper off over time, it's very difficult. We don't actually do work in condominiums and HOAs for that reason. I spent a lot of time and a lot of years trying to build programs that would be competitive with conventional, and it all just comes down to numbers in those areas, unfortunately. And philosophy of organics right now, anyway, just doesn't meet the numbers. That
I think that just answered Elaine's question. She said, "I live in an HOA. Do you have any information about HOAs transitioning to organic?"
Yeah, I would answer that question the same. Yep.
Yeah. Is it possible to have native edible plants as part of the landscape?
Absolutely. There is a great podcast called Native Plants, Healthy Planet Podcast. And I'm sure there's other ones out there, but this is one I know very well. It's from two local nurserymen from Pinelands Nursery in South Jersey. They've done their podcast a couple of times on edible natives and foraging. Oh, absolutely.
And so Mel kind of followed up on the social justice question and says it is a social justice issue because people are applying chemicals, are not educated, nor are they aware of what they are doing and how they are harming themselves or the environment.
You could frame it that way, I suppose.
Yeah.
But for our company, like I said, it was a change that we made in 2005 before that was even a thing. So for us, it's just our philosophy and the way we do things.
Well, Richard, I think that we're just about out of time, but I wanted to ask one last question. I kind of give myself that leeway sometimes. What do you think about pollinator lawns?
Pollinator lawns, is that AKA a meadow?
Not a meadow, but a pollinator lawn. So I believe Cornell, we had a speaker from Cornell about bees. And they brought up the topic of pollinator lawns, and I guess Minnesota has been doing some work with that. And we at DelVal, we contacted Ernst Seeds, and they put together a mix for us for a pollinator lawn versus a pollinator meadow, because we had an area that we would need to mow.
Right.
But just wanted your thoughts on that.
I think it probably depends upon what you're using, right? Like I mentioned, I think the important thing as far as that goes would be that pollinator lawn should be some sort of native species. and not knowing exactly what you're using in that mix, I don't see anything wrong with it.
I
Absolutely.
think there's a lot of dependency on clover. You know, there were other things that are thrown in there, but I think there's a great deal of dependency on clover. I've done the same thing on my lawn, and you know, it's kind of nice to actually see something out there flowering that the insects are getting to utilize rather than just that grass.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, with that said, I mean, you know, if we see clover in a lawn, you know, we try again. A lot of what we do is trying to educate our clients, and you know, we try to let them know that clover is an acceptable plant to have in your lawn, the nitrogen fixing and
As well as dandelions. Dandelions are really important for the early emerging plants, for the early pollinators as well.
mm-hmm.
Well, Richard, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure hearing your presentation. I learned so much tonight, and I'm sure a lot of folks are in touch with you with more additional questions. So thank you so much. Thank you again, Reg, for having us and co-hosting with us tonight.
Well, it has been a great pleasure having the Doylestown Environmental Advisory Council supporting this and bringing Richard to us this evening. Richard, it's been a fabulous presentation.
Thank you, Reg.
To all of you, if you're interested in either getting emails from me about upcoming presentations, again, I put in the chat earlier that my email address is reg.hoyt@delval.edu. Our next presentation is going to be on the 17th of March, and it's going to be Mike Van Cleft from the New Jersey Invasive Strike Team. So if you were interested in tonight's talk, you may be interested in coming for that one as well. Thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you. Thanks, Reg. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great evening. Good night, Heidi.
Good night. Bye, Rich.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.